Hello, this is Galactic Jedi, and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And for today's blog, I will be taking another short detour from my planned Doctor Who Mythology blog on the theories of time travel. Yes, I know this is my third detour that I am taking, and I call it the trifecta, and I do apologize for that, and I kind of feel bad because I know it must be frustrating for some. Seems like I will never get to that blog or finish that, get onto that topic and finish that blog. But there's no worries because I am working on that. I am currently working on the notes to do that blog to tackle that subject. But this month, late last month and early this month, there's been some issues. Sometimes there's issues that come up even from your planned topics that you plan to do blogs on. There's issues that come up where you feel so strongly convicted that you need to tackle certain subjects and deal with certain subjects and talk about them and get them off your chest, and that's why I've done these blogs on them. For instance, the first one I did was on the fanboys, the issue, the dark side of the fanboys issue. If you've seen that video, and I encourage you to watch that video if you haven't. I deal with the issue of the fanboys who hate Star Wars and hate George Lucas and stuff like that. So I deal with those issues. I dealt with that issue. And my previous one, which I did last week, was on my review for the season 1 of Rebels. I needed to share my thoughts on that and give my review on the first season of that new Star Wars TV show. And I was just planning to go on to the Doctor Who blog, but last week I finished watching something which is what this topic is going to be about. It's a little unusual because this will be the first, partially the topic is not a science fiction topic, but it's on the topic of the House of Cards. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. The House of Cards is a TV show, but it's strictly done by Netflix. It's not aired on television or even on the cable premium channels like HBO and Showtime. It's a Netflix. You can only get it through Netflix streaming. And last week I just finished watching the third season, and it disturbed me. There's a lot of things that I've been keeping up with that series, and it's a very popular series amongst the masses, but it has not gone over too well with me, and there's a lot of things that have bothered me about that series. And I, just like the other two topics, I needed to talk about this topic and get some things off my chest as I share my thoughts and ideas and why, and I'll tell you why I'm doing this topic on the House of Cards, because you might wonder, why by doing a blog? Because being my YouTube channel is a science fiction blog with primarily dealing with Star Wars and Doctor Who and other science fiction stuff like Star Trek and Marvel superheroes and stuff like that, or etc., whatever, in the science fiction world. So this is a topic particularly that's not science fiction. It's on the politics. So why am I doing that? Well, I'll share why. The title of this blog is called What Star Wars Can Teach Us About the House of Cards. Okay, now it's probably sounding like, what is a TV show about politics? How am I relating that to Star Wars? Am I forcing a correlation? Well, no, I'm not. I'm not, and you will see why. I am making this connection between. There's a huge connection between Star Wars and the House of Cards, and I'm not making this correlation. So it's not like something like I have to just connect because my YouTube channel is a science fiction blog on Star Wars. Let me just find some way to connect Star Wars with the House of Cards. No, there's more of a connection, and you're going to see how they are. You're going to see what it's like. And the reason why I'm tackling the House of Cards, the reason why I'm talking about a 9 science fiction show, is because the subject matter, or the content, well, how shall I say it, the worldview, which I'm going to get into a little bit later in this blog, to me is so disturbing that it's actually, to me, it's a dangerous worldview. It's a dangerous, the themes in House of Cards, what House of Cards is representing and teaching to the public, to me, is a very dangerous thing. And I think I need to tackle this topic, address these issues, and relate to that. And that's, but the connection between Star Wars and the House of Cards, there's a strong connection. And you will see that I'm just not putting this together, haphazardly, just to make some kind of, some kind of connection to justify it, this blog. But in order for me to do that, let me give you the rundown on what the House of Cards is. The House of Cards, keep in mind, the one that's on Netflix, is an original run show on Netflix, but it's an American version of a British. There was a British version a decade or two ago where it was a miniseries in England. And now in its 3rd season, they have made the American version of this, and just finished with its 3rd season. It's not, unlike the British one, which only had 3. This is ongoing. Looks like it's ongoing to the 4th. And I'm kind of through with the series, which I will explain at the end and why. But I do need to deal with some of these topics. Now keep in mind, for those who want to go spoiler-free and who wanted to watch this series, I do want to say that there are some things I'm going to be mentioning that will contain spoilers if you haven't seen any of the series, even up to the 3rd season. So keep in mind, I'm going to be mentioning some things that happened in the 3rd season, so I don't want to spoil anybody's thing if they want to go spoiler-free. So if that's the case, then I encourage you to stop this video now and come back to it after you've finished watching all 3 seasons of House of Cards, if that is your intention. You want to see the entire series first. But anyway, let's go on to the description. The House of Cards is about a protagonist, Francis Underwood. And this character is played by a veteran actor, Kevin Spacey, very good actor. He's played in a lot of different roles, but Kevin Spacey plays the main character, the main character for the series, Francis Underwood. And the secondary character is his wife, Claire Underwood, played by the actress Robin Wright. And so basically they are Washington. They live in Washington. Involved in politics, involved in Washington D.C. politics, and it's interesting because some commentators have compared, actually a lot of commentators that I've read online have compared the theme of the marriage between and relationship between Francis Underwood and his wife Claire to that of the Clintons. And if you're familiar with the series and watch the series, you'll know why. And of course, if you're familiar, been following politics over the last 20 years, especially during the Clinton years, you'll understand how they tried to make that correlation. It's sort of like they're married, but their marriage is uneasy. They're not. It's not like they're living together as a married couple. But sort of like an agreement, a partnership, so they can they can pursue their political careers and pursue, to get together, sort of convenient marriage, so they can climb the ladder in their political careers. But in spite of that, no matter what, which I don't buy, obviously I don't buy into all the hype that is out there and all the propaganda that's out there that coming with trashing politicians. So, but in spite of what they say about the Clintons, what the Underwoods and House of Cards are guilty of is far, far worse than anything that they've ever accused, any kind of scandals that they've accused the Clintons of. But let's talk about the story of the House of Cards. It's set in present-day Washington, D.C. And the story is of Frank Underwood. Like I said, he's the main character, the main protagonist. And this character, Frank Underwood, is a Democrat. He's a Democratic senator from South Carolina's 5th Congressional District. And he's a senator, but his role at this point in the beginning of the series is he's the House Majority Whip. And kind of hard to explain. I'm not even sure all everything a Majority Whip does, but I guess in a lot of ways they rally up and get people to vote for certain bills and support the president in his agenda for his bills that he wants to initiate and stuff like that. But that's his role. He's the House Majority Whip, and basically he helped the current president, at the beginning of the series, win the election. And he helped them to win the election with the promise by the president that after he won the election, that he would appoint Frank Underwood as a Secretary of State. But after the election, and this is where the series first starts, the president changes his mind, backs out on his deal, and he's passed over. The president decides to pass him over for the appointment of the Secretary of State. Well, this starts the whole thing. This starts the whole snowball running down the hill. And after that, he initiates an elaborate plan of revenge to get revenge against all the politicians in Washington, all the way up to the president, who've opposed him and betrayed him, especially in the area of being Secretary of State. And he has put this plan of revenge together to humiliate and depose a lot of these senators and other politicians in Washington. His plans were set forth then to gain more power, and to gain the highest power, ultimately the President of the United States. He eventually rises to the President of the United States, but he does throw over the first 2 seasons. He does so by deceptive subterfuge, manipulation, blackmail, and ultimately, and this is what I find most disturbing, is ultimately through cold-blooded murder and assassination. It's almost like he turns his little administration into almost like what the mafia is, with hits and trying to silence people and atrocities such as that. But we'll get into more of that a little bit later. By the end of, let's go through this progression. In the first season, after he's betrayed, that's when he sets forth his plan. And at the end of the first season, he's able to manipulate his way up to becoming vice president. He gets the vice president dethroned, gets him out of it, and then is able to manipulate the president or so, and the people to appoint him as the vice president. So he's the vice president at the end of the first season. Then it doesn't stop there, because obviously all of these power-hungry schemes are continuing right into the second season. Then at the end of the second season, Francis Underwood, he's able to create a scandal, which I'm not going to go into too much detail. You have to watch the series to find out all the details of what's going on. He's able to create a scandal with the sitting president, the one whom he helped get elected, because the president is a weak individual. Even though he was elected president, he is a weak leader, and Frank Underwood was able to create a scandal to put him in a very bad light, and being he was not a strong leader, that scandal just grew, and he was forced to resign. He ended up resigning rather than let things get worse for him and his administration. And of course, since Frank Underwood is the vice president after he resigned, at the very end of the season, he took over. And it's interesting. It's interesting that he even you can tell some of the comments, the sly comments that Frank Underwood makes. He's talking about, and this gives you a hint of where the series is going and where the thinking of Frank Underwood. Because keep in mind, one of the way this series works, which is unique, not a lot of television shows have done this. I don't know of any other than this one, is during the interaction with the characters in the show, he will take that pause and look at the television screen like he's speaking to you as the audience, and he's giving you his thoughts. So he'll interact and have some interaction with characters, but then he'll turn to you, and then he'll talk to you and share his thoughts. And one of his thoughts was, he says, heartbeat away from the presidency, and yet not one vote was cast in my name. So much for democracy, so much for so much. It shows you that it's his ambition, that he doesn't respect the role of democracy and the choice of the people for their leaders, that he feels that he's entitled to being the ultimate leader, and no, he doesn't want he will refuse to let anyone get in his way, even the American people. So at the end of the second season, Frank takes over as President of the United States. Now, you question, how does this relate to Star Wars? Well, I'm going to share with you how this relates to Star Wars. Many of you, if you're thinking right now, you probably get it. You probably think, if you're thinking how I described Frank Underwood, and you're probably thinking of Emperor Palpatine. That's right, Palpatine. And I just described to you the basic characteristics, what happened to Frank in the beginning of the season 1, his elaborate plan for revenge, and his eventual gradual going from the House Majority Whip Senator to Vice President, all the way to the President of the United States, through corruption, and even through murder and assassination and subterfuge. Well, that's the story of Palpatine. So let me discuss Palpatine, and you will see a lot of very similar story to the rise of Emperor Palpatine. Well, let's start at the beginning with Palpatine. Palpatine was born to an aristocratic family on the planet of Naboo, and before, now it was later in life that he got involved in politics, but before he became very interested in the Sith and the dark side of the Force. And later on, now keep in mind, before he became a senator, and seeking to get initiated as a Sith Lord, which he eventually did as Darth Sidious. But the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis, who was the Sith Master at that time, keep in mind, remember the Order of Two? The Order of Two, Darth Bane, 1,000 years prior to these events, set the Order of Two, one Master and one Apprentice. Well, at the time, the Master was Darth Plagueis, and he was a moon. Darth Plagueis was from the race of moons. They're the head of the International Banking Clan. Do you remember from my Star Wars mythology on the galaxy, Star Wars Galaxy? I talked about the moons. Well, Darth Plagueis was a moon, and he was a Sith Master, and he initiated Palpatine into the Sith Order and trained him as a Sith, and initiated him as Darth Sidious. Now, keep in mind, these events which I'm talking about were both mentioned in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, but the story was delved more deeply in the EU novel, Darth Plagueis. Okay, now the plan was, as you know, from the time of the Order of Two, because the Sith were defeated by the Jedi, and also infighting, and that's why infighting amongst themselves. That's why the Darth Bane went to the Order of Two. It was the plan all along for the Sith to conquer the Galactic Republic from within, and ultimately that was Darth Plagueis' plan, along with Darth Sidious, that they had planned to overthrow the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order from within. Instead of fighting an outward war, they were going to work and manipulate their way inside the system to become so powerful that they can overtake and conquer the Galactic Republic and destroy the Jedi, and destroy the Jedi Order from within. But during these years, as they were planning that, because keep in mind, Palpatine, aka Darth Sidious, he went into politics, and Darth Plagueis continued to train Darth Sidious. He continued to train Darth Sidious in the ways of the dark side of the Force, and some of it, and trying to introduce and teach him. Teach him some of the secrets and some of the theories he had that were even foreign to some of the other Jedi. Foreign to some of the other Sith lords from prior. Because Darth Plagueis was searching for a way to achieve eternal life. He was trying to seek power from the dark side of the Force to achieve eternal life. Remember, Palpatine said to Anakin that Darth Plagueis thought he had knowledge in the Force, that he could prevent people from dying. Well, this is during that time Darth Plagueis was seeking through the dark side of the Force a way to achieve eternal life and prevent people from dying, specifically himself. And during this time, Palpatine was involved in politics. He wasn't dealing with the philosophical aspects of the Force or even the dark side of the Force, even though he was learning it. But basically, he was working his way through the Galactic Republic, the politics of the Galactic Republic, as a senator. Became a senator from the planet Naboo, representing the planet Naboo. And during these years, he was manipulating galactic politics. Now, keep in mind, as you know, that the Sith Order from the time of Darth Bane, and this is sort of the result. Now, keep in mind, unlike the Jedi, the Sith want to rise to power. They all want to rise to power. You ever heard that? I remember as a kid, I heard that saying, "Too many chiefs, not enough Indians." And basically what that is everybody wants to be leader. Everybody wants power and to be in control and be the leader. But not everybody wants to follow and follow a leader. Well, that's the Sith goal, is that they're power hungry. And all these Sith from the past, from centuries in the past, millennia in the past, they fought one another because they wanted to be supreme. So that's why Darth Bane went to the Order of Two. But see, in the Order of Two, that prevented a lot of the infighting, but basically the way the Order worked is that you have one master and one apprentice. And usually when the apprentice learned enough, the way he rose up in rank is he wasn't a point like the Jedi Order appoint ranks. Because they respect living beings, or they respect their members, the life of their members, and they respect the Order, and they, it's sort of like a respect for the lives of their members and the Order, and respecting one another, so they don't kill one another, they don't assassinate one another. But that's the way the Sith are. The Sith raise up in rank where the apprentice feels like he's learned enough that he can take on his master. And the idea and the philosophy of the Sith are, if you're not able to hold on to your power, then you don't deserve it. So if the apprentice is able to kill the master, then the apprentice deserves to raise up as master. That's how the Sith raise up in rank ever since the Order of Two. From the time of Darth Bane, is the apprentice would kill the master, and he would raise up the rank. That's how he did it. That was the tradition for 1,000 years, where they were planning their subterfuge of invading the Republic from within. That was the tradition that carried on from Master and Apprentice all the way up to Darth Plagueis and Palpatine. But Darth Plagueis, like I said, he was a little unorthodox from the regular Sith Order. He had planned to forsake Bane's rule of two. He knew he was trying to be very careful in what he taught Palpatine. But he did not intend for Palpatine to learn so much, give him power to be able to kill him, assassinate him, so he can take over as the Master. What he had planned to do is he intended to remain as Master and to have Darth Sidious under him, have both of them rule the galaxy, but he's the supreme, and essentially Darth Sidious rules under him. And he was hoping he could rule forever because, like I said, he wanted to achieve eternal life and prevent himself from dying. And from others, I would assume that would be Darth Sidious. To prevent him from dying, but the two of them would rule the galaxy together. And what the plan was is that once Palpatine became Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, that, like I said, Plagueis would rule the galaxy with Darth Sidious, with Palpatine. And how you would do it is as a de facto of co-chancellor. And basically what Darth Plagueis was hoping for is, that Palpatine, keep in mind, Palpatine or Darth Sidious would be under Plagueis. They ruled together, but ultimately Plagueis would be the supreme. So Palpatine would have, the plan was Palpatine would have the throne or the seat of the Supreme Chancellor or the Supreme Leader, but ultimately behind the scenes, it would really be Darth Plagueis. I don't know if you've seen the Game of Thrones, this series of Game of Thrones, but the Lannister family, I believe it's the Lannister family, where you have, the son. Trying to think of his name. Please forgive me. It's just, I'm having a brain freeze. He's ruling, but was a weak leader, and whoever was there is sort of like they were a puppet figure. Somebody who's sitting in the seat of the throne technically has the legal power of authority. But it was the patriarch of the father of that family. He was really sitting behind the scenes and ruling the things. It was really him pulling the strings. Well, that was Darth Plagueis' plan, is that Palpatine would have the seat of power, the seat of rule as the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, but it would really be Darth Plagueis running the show, essentially making sure that Palpatine only passed laws that he approved of. But the thing is that, as you know, with the Sith mentality, is they don't share power. And Palpatine had no intention of sharing his power with his master. So secretly he put this deceptive plan, through subterfuge, to murder Darth Plagueis, and was very good at his deceptiveness, because, as we know the story, while Darth Plagueis was sleeping, that's when and was not on guard and was not assuming that, didn't think that Sidious would take him on. Darth Sidious, Palpatine, murdered Plagueis in his sleep and gave him the opportunity to take over as the Sith Lord. So at that point, now Darth Sidious went from being the apprentice, because he assassinated his master, Darth Plagueis, while in his sleep. Then he ascended to his role as the Sith Lord, from apprentice to the Sith Lord, And then he anointed. That's when he anointed Darth Maul, the Zabrak Darth Maul. He had him as his apprentice. But Darth Sidious, now keep in mind, Darth Sidious has been on record as being the most powerful, just like Yoda is being one of the most powerful Jedi of all time. Darth Sidious is considered the most powerful Sith Lord of all time. And you can see it, especially how he was able to overcome and deceive Darth Plagueis, his master. So Darth Sidious becomes the Sith Lord at that point, and Darth Maul becomes his apprentice, his Sith Apprentice. But the thing is Darth Sidious had put a plan in, and very good plan, even better than Darth Plagueis' plan, because keep in mind that Darth Sidious was not a fan of Bane's role. But he wasn't going to make the same mistake of having a shared rule like Darth Plagueis was with Sidious. Darth Sidious wanted to be the only sole ruler. He didn't want to share rule, just like Darth Plagueis did with Sidious. So Palpatine wanted to become the sole ruler, not share power, even with his apprentice, Darth Maul. He had no intentions of sharing his power. He wanted to be the supreme leader, the supreme power of the Galactic Republic forever. And he put his plan into action at that time. So by the time we get to the events of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, by this time, keep in mind, since the time of the defeat of the Sith, the last Sith war with the Jedi Order, for the last 1,000 years, the galaxy had experienced an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity for 1,000 years. But that came at a price. There was as they say, there's what's that saying? That there's a trade-off. What they call it. There was a price to pay, even though that having peace is desirable, but there was a trade-off, a price to pay for that, and that is that over the millennia, the Galactic Senate became corrupt. There was political corruption at the heart of the Galactic Senate. Senators were there only there, not representing the people, not representing the galaxy, the citizens of the galaxy. They were there, just like you see today in today's politics with Congress. They're there for their own means, for their own agendas, to get rich, for power, to get more riches, to get more power, to get more influence, to escalate their careers, and it's at the expense of democracy, and it's at the expense of the welfare of the citizens of the galaxy. And so there was corruption all over the Galactic Senate, and certainly with this corruption, there was apathy towards justice, especially social justice, which we'll see in a minute. The Supreme Chancellor, keep in mind, the Supreme Chancellor is equivalent. He's a limited, we have called the constitutional monarchy, or a monarch, a leader with limited power. Very much the same as our President of the United States, the role that our President plays in the United States, and also the Prime Minister of England, same role that the Prime Minister plays with England, and so. At this time, the Supreme Chancellor was Finis Valorum. He was a human. But very much, much in the same way that the president, and the former president in House of Cards was a very weak leader, Valorum was a very weak leader. And he was full of scandals. His family, his house was full of scandals, and his legacy and his administration was full of scandals, and this made him weak, and he was very unable to stand up as a strong leader against the corruption in the Senate. Sidious sort of pulled his strings, pretending to be his friend. Palpatine, people didn't know he was Sidious. He hid, he had a double life, one as a politician, as a senator from Naboo, and the other one was the Dark Lord of the Sith, as Darth Sidious. So at this time, Darth Sidious, now keep in mind, wasn't Palpatine dealt with the Senate, but as Darth Sidious, he dealt with the Neimoidian leaders of the Trade Federation and manipulated and got them to do certain things. And at this time, there was a controversial tax put on a lot of these trade, like the Trade Federation and a lot of these other industrial things. There was a heavy tax put on the galaxy to support some of the funds for some of the star systems in inner rim, mid rim, and outer rim territories. Well, the Trade Federation didn't like that. They felt, just like many corporations, they don't want to pay the tax, and they felt it was unfair. And so when the Senate had a resolution of BR 0317, that's the code for their law, for their taxation law, Sidious encouraged the Neimoidians of the Trade Federation to put a blockade up against Naboo in a protest, trying to force the Senate's hand into alleviating the taxes on them. And so anyway, to go on, as events unfolded, that things didn't go exactly the way that Darth Sidious wanted them to, and even the Trade Federation, because Amidala, Queen Amidala, Padme Amidala, who was the mother of Luke and Leia, and the wife of Anakin, she will become, but not at this time. She's only 14 years old, and she's a queen. She's the queen of Naboo, again a queen, a constitutional monarch, not an absolute. She's the queen. But Amidala sent an appeal to Valorum, Chancellor Valorum, and he sent 2 Jedis. Keep in mind, remember, the Jedis are the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. Well, they have they're sometimes sent on diplomatic missions as ambassadors, and so Valorum sent Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi as the ambassadors. And essentially, the way the Jedi work is what we call, what they even how they joked in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. They referred to aggressive negotiations, meaning basically, Jedi come, they say, let's sit down and make a joint agreement, and if you refuse and continue to be hostile, we will settle the conflict by lightsaber. So you can see how the Neimoidians and Trade Federation were intimidated when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan showed up. And when they informed Darth Sidious, he was taken by surprise by this. And at this time, he encouraged the Trade Federation to invade Naboo. Now, that was illegal. The blockade wasn't illegal, but the invasion was, because they were invading a sovereign planet. But they made one mistake, because Darth Sidious told the Neimoidians, block the transmission so they don't know what's going on, and kill the Jedi, kill everybody on board. So they destroyed the Neimoidians, destroyed the ship and killed those escorts who flew the 2 Jedi to the Trade Federation. They murdered them, and then tried to murder the Jedi Knights, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But they managed to survive, use their Jedi skills to survive, get down to the planet Naboo, was able to rescue Amidala from capture by the Trade Federation, and they were able to escape. And I don't want to tell you, anybody who's watched The Phantom Menace knows what happened. They were able to eventually get Amidala. The Jedis were able to help Amidala and her cabinet of leaders to escape Naboo, the occupation of Naboo, and they eventually we made it back. We're able to make it back to Coruscant, the planet Coruscant. So Amidala could put her. She wanted to personally put her pleas into the Galactic Republic. I mean, the Galactic Senate herself, in order to plead with them, in order for the Galactic Senate to rule in her favor for the Galactic Republic to force, either by law, and if they don't listen to it by law, then force, use force, and then a military unit there, a military force to Naboo to remove the Trade Federation and to prosecute them for an illegal occupation of a sovereign planet, and also the suffering and murder of hundreds of its citizens. But the problem is that because the Galactic Senate was corrupt, and the Galactic Senate was corrupt, and there was a lot of manipulation, because remember, the Nomordians were also some of the Nomordians were in the Galactic Senate, and there was a lot, of course, whenever, when they say, when money talks, what walks, that here's Amidala, she's making her plea, saying, hey, look, my people are suffering, and some of them are dying. This invasion has got to stop now. This occupation's got to stop now. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's heinous. It's criminal. Even genocidal in some ways. It should end today. There should be a law. You should send out a notice today. You should send a military force, a Republic military force today to Naboo, forcing the Trade Federation to surrender and to remove themselves from the planet. But there was corruption, and there was manipulation, saying, well, we got to investigate more and this and that, and would you, would you defer to our investigation? There's all this political stuff, political corruption that was happening because of money and the influence of the Trade Federation with senators, and, again, like, this is political corruption. They were only interested not in social justice, but only interested in themselves and furthering their political careers. And, of course, Palpatine, who was posing as somebody who's a very strong supporter of Amidala, manipulated her, and this is part of the manipulation and the subterfuge, deceptive subterfuge that he was using, saying that she's not going to get any justice. She's not going to get any justice with the Senate because of the corruption, and she could make an appeal in the courts. But of course, the courts can take forever, and she didn't like that idea because, as weeks and months go by until the courts get around to dealing with her case, more of her people are dying and suffering. She needed that invasion and that occupation to end today. So Palpatine said the only way is we've got to remove Valorum and put another strong Supreme Chancellor in there who will make sure that the Trade Federation is removed. She didn't like doing that because because Valorum, she was a strong supporter of Valorum. She felt very close to him, but she felt trapped. She felt she had no choice because of the occupation and the suffering of her people on Naboo. So she went with Palpatine's suggestion, and she called for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum, and that really shocked him. But from that point, Valorum, it was almost like the vote was unanimous. The vote was strong in the Senate, but they were able to impeach him and remove him from office. Remove him from office. And of course, there was another special election to elect a new chancellor. That was Palpatine's time to move in to his to move in, to take his opportunity to move in, which was his plan all along. So by the end of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Palpatine was then elected as a Supreme Chancellor. Now he went from being just a senator to Supreme Chancellor. Interesting. Same. It sounds very similar to Francis Underwood, doesn't it? Now he's moving up the ladder. Same way he moved up the ladder, Palpatine's moved up the ladder. But now we get into 10 years in between Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. So 10 years have passed since the time of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But by the time we get to Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, the galaxy is on the eve of civil war. Because various star systems, because keep in mind, there is a lot of disgruntled, just like with the American people with Congress, the disapproval rating with Congress. There's a lot of star systems that are very disgruntled with the Galactic Senate and high disapproval because they know of the corruption and they're not getting any satisfaction for justice and just laws. And the senators are all just looking out for their own interest. So they feel, throw in the towel, give up the ghost. It's time that we separate ourselves, the star system separate from the Galactic Republic, because, the Galactic Senate, because Galactic Senate is too corrupt and they're hopeless. So it would separate from the Galactic Republic and form our own government. And which was titled officially as the Confederacy for Independent Systems. And so, like I said, the star systems who formed the Confederacy for Independent Systems, they wanted to separate, but as you know, that felt threatening to the Republic because that would split the Republic, and that would not be kosher, and it would make the Republic weak and probably eventually dissolved. So that wasn't a good idea. And of course, Palpatine that was Palpatine's point of view, and that's why he said he's not going to let, remember he said in the beginning of Attack of the Clones, I will not let this Republic, which stood for 1,000 years, be split in two. Well, yeah, he believed that, but there was another purpose. It was an ulterior motive, because he was used the Clone Wars to elevate himself to the next power, next level of power. So Palpatine used this separatist crisis to obtain emergency powers, because even though there was peace talks and trying to, many senators, especially Padme, because Padme wasn't a queen anymore, she was now a senator of Naboo, she was trying to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict with the separatists, rather than going to war. But things escalated. You saw the movie. I'm not going to go into all the details of Attack of the Clones, Episode 2 of Attack of the Clones, but things were escalating very fast, especially due to the manipulation of both Sith, because, as you know, Darth Maul was killed at the end of Phantom Menace, and between those 10 years, Darth Sidious replaced his apprentice with Darth Tyrannus, a.k.a. Count Dooku. So Count Dooku became the political leader of the Separatists, the Confederacy for Independent Systems, and Palpatine remained the leader of the Galactic Republic. But both Sith Lords, or both the Sith, worked together to manipulate both sides. So a war would escalate. This would give them the opportunity, Darth Sidious, the opportunity to rise in power even more. So, because the separatist crisis was critically getting out of hand and escalating, and looked like war was imminent, Palpatine used that to ask the Senate for emergency powers. Because the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the separatists, they made a deal with all the banking clan, the Techno Union, and the Trade Federation, and they got a droid army. And since the Republic hadn't fought a war for 1,000 years, there was not much of a standing army to the combat. And of course, the Jedi felt that they were keepers of the peace, and that they weren't an army themselves. So they needed the approval once they found out about the clones. The clone troopers, they needed the approval. So they gave, under the guise of temporary emergency powers, Bad move, a very bad move, because that was the beginning of the erosion of their constitution and their democracy at that point, because they gave Palpatine those kind of emergency powers so he can act without the Senate's approval and maintain his power throughout the Clone Wars. So the Clone Wars began at that point. And in between that, and we know that the Clone Wars began at the end with the first Battle of Geonosis, at the end of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Then when we pick up in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, 2 years had passed, a little over 2 years had passed during the Clone Wars. But the problem with the Clone Wars is, instead of a war to accomplish a cessation with the Separatists and their goals to succeed from the Republic, it ended up turning up very much like what our Vietnam War turned up. The Clone Wars became an endless war of attrition, and it was going nowhere by the time the events of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. By this time, over these 2 years, Palpatine slowly, because he used his power to consolidate more power under the emergency powers rule that the Senate gave him, he consolidated so much power that the Republic's constitution was subsided and democracy was slowly eliminated, to the point that there was no balance of power in the Senate. And this ultimately left Palpatine with all the power. And even though he was still the Supreme Chancellor, and he was supposed to, like a constitutional monarch, he was supposed to have limited power, technically he was acting as a despot at this point. He had the power of a despot, even though he didn't declare himself one just yet. He had that power because, keep in mind, their constitution was shredded. There was virtually no democracy towards the end of the Clone Wars. The galaxy was in turmoil because they were still in an endless war of attrition and felt like it was going nowhere. Because keep in mind, both Siths, both Count Dooku and Palpatine, in the roles of their Sith as Darth Sidious and Darth Tyrannus, worked together to make sure that no side had an advantage over the Separatists were not able to gain an advantage in the war over the Republic, and the Republic was not able to gain an advantage over the Separatists during the Clone Wars. So it was like an even match, and it just went on and on and on until it became a war of attrition. And that was for purpose, because Palpatine needed that in order to be able to continue consolidating his powers through that Emergency Power Act. So the Senate would leave him unquestioningly the Senate would ultimately leave him unquestioningly to allow him to take those powers. But as you know, towards the end of the Clone Wars, towards the end of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, that's when it all came together. Or shall we say, put it in the colloquial term of today, that's when it all hit the fan. Palpatine initiated his final plan with Order 66. Order 66 was something that was planned way early. We even see this in the Clone Wars TV show. Some of the topics talking about the revealing of Order 66, the programming inside the clone troopers, to carry out Order 66 when it was time. It was commanded by Palpatine. And essentially Order 66 was the Holocaust of the Jedi Purge. That was the act where, essentially the Jedi were separated. Palpatine had separated all the Jedi Masters and all the Jedi, so they weren't together to defend each other. They were separated throughout the galaxy, fighting on various planets against the Separatists. And then, because they were separated and able to protect, he used that with Order 66 for the clone troopers to turn on them and murder their Jedi Masters, their Jedi leaders. And then, of course, we know that after Anakin was converted, he used Anakin to go into the Jedi Temple and slaughter all the Jedi that were in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, even the children, the Jedi younglings. He murdered. He had them murdered. He didn't want anybody as potential to oppose his power. And after this, because he claimed that the Jedi, because we know the Jedi was trying to take him out because he was a Sith Lord, trying to take absolute control as a despot. So it was a just, what's the word, mutiny against Palpatine. The Jedi's was a justified coup, shall we say. But he used it as saying it was an illegal coup that the Jedi tried to commit against him. And now he had all the power, so basically, when Palpatine, at that point, he declared himself Emperor, not the Supreme Chancellor, now the Emperor, the ultimate despot over the entire galaxy. Then he rechristened the Galactic Republic, because it was no longer a republic. He rechristened it as the Galactic Empire, which became the empire we know from episodes 4, 5, and 6. And he did that, and the entire Senate applauded. Essentially, he had all the power. The senators were corrupt, and they gave over their power. And that was the theme of Lucas, because Lucas was talking about how a democracy doesn't get conquered from a force without. It gets conquered from a force within, where the people actually give their power over to a despot, which has happened. Hitler, for instance. That happened with Hitler, as example. But it has happened many times in human history. So Palpatine now, as Darth Sidious, becomes the Emperor, the Supreme Despot, the Supreme Emperor of the galaxy, and the Republic is no more and gets rechristened as the Galactic Empire. Well, that's the rise. You notice you see the progression. You see the progression. There's a contrast. I mean, there's a very close comparison between Palpatine and Francis Underwood. The same way, shall we say, I'll go with Palpatine, the same way that Palpatine from Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, to consolidate his power, from Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, he was a senator, then he manipulated his way to become a Supreme Chancellor, then went from being a Supreme Chancellor in the Clone Wars to consolidating powers. So the constitution of limited power and limited terms inside your role as a Supreme Chancellor was severed. So he had more and more power to consolidate his powers. Then, at the end of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, that's when he made his ultimate move by trying to commit genocide against the Jedi Knights and the Jedi Order, and then declared himself as ultimate Supreme Emperor of the galaxy. And that's how it went from progression, from Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and then Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. That was the order. That was the progression of his gain to power, where Francis Underwood in the House of Cards did the same exact thing. From Season 1, he went from being the Senate, being a senator of Majority House Whip, to at the end of the first season being the Vice President, to at the end of the second season being the President of the United States. And then in the third season, he's trying to find a way, because keep in mind that he's just a sitting president. He wasn't elected president, but he wants to get reelected so he can remain as president. So there's you can see the similarities. But see, that's where the connection ends between Star Wars and the House of Cards. From there, the worldview between Star Wars and the House of Cards is very, very different. And this is the crux of the matter. This is the heart of the issue. But let me explain what a worldview is, so you'll have a foundation and understanding of where I'm going with this. Okay, when I talk about a worldview is something that's very important. It's probably the major subject or the major topic you would have, or you should have, in a college philosophy course. Because the worldview is extremely important. It is the central topic in talking about philosophy. But let me explain what a worldview is, the concept of a worldview. A worldview is an all-encompassing philosophical way to see the world. It's basically how you view the world. It's basically how you see the world. Your belief systems. Whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, whether you believe there's good and evil or not, or whether you believe in fate. The most famous thing is, the famous thing that people talk about, people believe in is, do you believe in fate, or do you believe in free will? Do you believe things happen for a reason, or do you think everything is random and the universe has no reason? Well, that's at the center of the concept of a worldview. It depends on your worldview, how you look at the world. And there's three categories that are covered under a worldview: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Okay? Metaphysics basically is dealing with ultimate reality. What do you believe about ultimate reality? Like, we believe that the world is real, the physical world is real, matter and energy. But do you believe only matter and energy, like the atheists do? Or do you believe there's a spiritual realm where God exists and angels? Do you believe in the concept of karma, that there's a purpose behind our lives, that there's a spiritual purpose behind our lives, something that guides us, a divine thing that guides us in life? Or do you believe that we're without any kind of spiritual knowledge or spiritual life, that we're just physical beings and life is just random? So basically, what you're getting at is, what do you believe is the ultimate reality of the universe? That's what metaphysics is. Metaphysics. Have a little tongue twister there. Epistemology is known as the theory of knowledge. It's basically getting at, how do you know what you know? Epistemology is asking, how do you know what you know? Right? Well, I'll give you an example. I wasn't born until 1970. So, I was born 1970. Let me take that back. I was born 1970. So President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, was President of the United States before I was born, almost a decade before I was born. So I wasn't around. So I never met the man, and I was never around. So how do I know he existed? How do I know that he's just not a fable or a fictional character that's just made up? Well, that's getting at the question, how do I know what I know? I believe that John F. Kennedy was a real person. He was the President of the United States. He wasn't a fictional character, etc., etc. How do I know this? Because I never met the man. I wasn't alive. I wasn't around when he was around. He died almost a decade prior to my birth. Well, how I know is various sources. Those are I would bring up the various sources. History books would be one. Videotapes, I saw videotapes of from the time that President Kennedy was president, especially his famous speech where he says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country." That's probably one of the most famous speeches by a president. So I saw that speech. And also personal testimony. My parents, my grandparents, my relatives, a lot of my aunts and uncles, they were around. I wasn't, but they were around. And they saw Kennedy in the newspapers and TV, and they were around when Kennedy. So I use those various forms through personal testimony, through videos I've seen, through history books. I use those evidence to say, through that thing, even though I've never met the man or seen the man in person, through those things, I know that President John F. Kennedy was a real person, and he was the president. So basically, that's getting at the answer. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. Of how do you know what you know? It's asking, explain what is your beliefs. Metaphysics is, what do you believe is ultimate reality? And then when we get to epistemology, is how do you know what you know? The theory of knowledge. Then the final thing is ethics. What is your moral beliefs? What do you think that society holds you, and what are you bound by? Your conscience is bound by. And that's pretty much what ethics is asking. Now see, ethics, being the third point of the worldview, is all dependent on what your metaphysical beliefs are and what your epistemology is. So with your metaphysical beliefs and epistemology, your ethics is going to follow. And that's very important. So keep in mind, what you believe ultimate reality is, what you believe how you can know something, and what you believe you know and how you know it, and are able to describe and defend how you know it, is going to determine what your ethics are going to be. So you don't choose ultimately your ethics. Your ethics follow from what your metaphysical beliefs are and your epistemology is. That's what is known as the worldview. So how does this deal with today's topic? Why am I bringing this up for today's topic? Well, in order to understand the House of Cards, like I said, I've dealt with the concept of the worldview and explained what it is. So in order to understand why I talked about the worldview and emphasized the worldview is very important, is we have to, and how this relates to the House of Cards, what the importance is, what the crux of this whole discussion is for the House of Cards, is we have to understand the worldview of the creator of the worldview of its creator, Willimon, if I'm announcing him right, Willimon, and Beau Willimon, if I'm pronouncing it not right, he is the creator of the American version of the game. Of the House of Cards. He's the creator of the American version that's playing on Netflix, and I think it's important that we understand his worldview in order to understand what is the overall encompassing worldview of the House of Cards, and especially coming from the protagonist character of Francis Underwood. So in order to do that, I'm going to read on this separate sheet of paper. I'm going to read a couple statements from an interview, a couple statements from a couple interviews that he had, Beau Willimon had on House of Cards, and his main character of Francis Underwood. And we can take it from there to talk about his worldview. This is what Beau said about Francis Underwood. It says, in terms of Francis being optimistic, I firmly believe that. I'm seeing it from his point of view. I don't have an agenda. In his view, ideology is a form of cowardice. Your moral code prescribes your behavior and leaves you no choice. If people say, I'm not going to bend on my moral code, it's a form of paralysis. That's what he said. Now let me go on. I'm going to say, this is what the interviewer asked. This is the question the interviewer asked. It says, but all the people who behave as though they have a moral compass wind up getting professionally wrecked or killed. And the people who just do whatever with no regard for ethics are the ones who end up succeeding. That was the thing, because keep in mind, that's what happens in the House of Cards. That's the theme that happens in the entire series. So let's see what Beau Willimon's response was. This is what he said. You're bringing your worldview, your Jessica Goldstein worldview, to that. Frank Underwood would disagree with you about what justice is. He would say ideology or morality is a form of cowardice, that it's a false view of the world. He doesn't see himself as evil. He sees people who try to reduce things to the black and white, a good versus evil, as foolish. You can look at it, though, through that lens and see objective good and evil, but it is subjective. I think when people talk about morality tales, they're assuming that there's an objective morality. Frank Underwood, being quite honest in the way that he approaches the world, doesn't view things that way. There are people in the show who do, but it's left to you, as an audience member, to decide what ideology you bring to the table and how that influences your perception of these characters. Interesting. Interesting statements by the creator of this show, The House of Cards. Where have we heard that philosophy before? Where have we heard those things before? Think. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. You remember that conversation? That famous conversation in the Mon Calamari opera house that Palpatine had with Anakin? And he gets into philosophy, tells him about his, of course not revealing that it was his former master, but he tells him about Darth Plagueis and his ideals and desires to seek things that are unnatural. Some people think are unnatural in the Force. and including preventing people from dying and achieving immortality. And Anakin, of course, that piques Anakin's interest because he has those visions and those dreams of his wife Padme dying, and that frightens him because he lost his mother in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. So that gets him hooked, interested. He says it's possible to learn these things. He says not from the Jedi, and Palpatine goes, not from the Jedi, and that starts a whole Discord conversation about Palpatine's view, because Anakin is bringing what he was taught, that the Jedi represent good, the light side of the Force, and they represent sacrifice and altruism, doing for others, the goodness of others for the sake of others. And Palpatine's point of view is there is no good and evil. It's only a perspective that you come at. Everybody thinks they're good. Palpatine himself thought he was good. He didn't come like you would see in Inspector Gadget cartoon and say, I'm the bad guy, I love being the bad guy. He came with the idea that he was the Messiah. He was doing good. But his philosophy, Palpatine's philosophy, was that of a nihilist. It was sort of like there is no good and evil. That doesn't exist. It's only perspective. Everybody thinks they're good, but he also emphasized when he was talking to Anakin. He says he thinks that everybody, including the Jedi, are all after power. Everybody wants power. He wants power, the Jedi want power, so it's all relative. There's no good and evil, we're just all after power. And all a matter, and see the Sith, that's the difference between, I'm going to be doing a blog, blogs later on Sith and Jedi Order and the Force, so I'm going to be covering these in more detail. But basically, the Jedi believe it's not that they don't have the same powers that the Sith do, they do, but they choose not to use them, and there's a purpose. They choose not to use them because they know it leads to the dark side. They know it leads to evil. They know it leads to suffering. So they purposely don't do it for the sake of good, for the sake of others, the welfare of everyone. Sith don't care because the Sith believe if the power it can be attained, then you should use it. It's just like the same thing. If that was their philosophy with the Order of Two. If a master's not able to hold his power, then he doesn't deserve to have it. So he gets assassinated, just too bad. Well, they believe if you have the power, then you have the right to use it. And if everybody else suffers, too bad. It's it's sort of a selfish, a greedy, and narcissistic, a sociopath, shall we say, the kind of that the world revolves around you, and you're entitled. And if you have the power to use it, use it. And there's no such thing as good and evil. It's all a perspective. That was Palpatine's perspective. That that there isn't that the dark side and the light side of the Force and the Jedi and the Sith are not good versus evil. They're just Force users. One who is willing to achieve what we call the Machiavellian view, the 15th century philosopher who believed that that it's good for a leader of a people to use brutal, unethical methods. Harsh, brutal, unethical, immoral, and atrocious methods to control his people. Machiavellian, both Palpatine could be described as having that kind of philosophy, and definitely Francis Underwood has that philosophy. And we just got done hearing those statements because the idea is there is no such thing as good and evil. The idea that there is no really good and evil. It's all a perspective. And it's sort of a nihilistic kind of view. There is no right or wrong. There is no good and evil. It's just everything is neutral. It's all what you bring to the table and how much power you can wield. Sort of like might makes right. If you're strong enough, you can force your own personal morality on others. But there is no objective morality to speak of. No objective good and evil from their perspective. And let me say this. That definition, in and of itself, I wrote a thesis in seminary on Star Wars and religion and philosophy. And I talked about the concept, the philosophical worldview of the Sith according to the Sith. their worldview, that's the very same thing, that there is no good and evil. It's not objective. There is no objective morality. It's no objective good and evil. It's all subjective. And if you have the power, if you have the power, you should use it no matter who suffers. And that's not a wrong thing. That's not evil. That kind of philosophy in and of itself, the idea that when you say there is no good and evil, that is the concept of evil. That is by very definition. When you say it's not like evil comes, evil doesn't flow out of people who say there is no good objective morality, no objective good and evil distinction between good and evil. It's not. What I'm saying is that evil doesn't flow out from that thinking. Correction, back up a little bit. That thinking in and of itself is evil in itself. If you understand what I'm saying. It's not like somebody is neutral. They have a philosophy of morality is subjective and good and evil is subjective, and there is no objective distinction between good and evil. It's not like they're neutral at that point, and then eventually that corrupts them and they become evil. No. They are evil. Evil's already corrupted them. That's why they have that worldview. That philosophy in and of itself is the very definition of evil. As a Christian, as an evangelical Christian, I believe that God and His Word are absolute truth. He's the creator of the universe. He's the ultimate. He's the Almighty. He is the definer of reality. He is truth. He doesn't have truth. God doesn't have truth. He is truth by definition. So when Satan says, well, God's you're on equal level, I'm on equal level, and we can all choose, we can all be our own gods, and, just like the serpent lie in the garden, we can all be our own gods and choose what is good and evil. It's all subjective, there's no objective. That by very definition, because what you're saying is who the ultimate truth is, the ultimate truth, who is truth himself, the ultimate author of reality. When you reject him and say, hey, you can be God equal with him and just choose your own morality and your own reality and your own concept of good and evil. That is basically choosing evil. Because evil is the absence of good. And I think even in the Force, even in Star Wars, the Force, the concept, the absence of good is the evil. And Palpatine is the embodiment in the Star Wars universe of the absence of good. He is evil because he believes there is no clear distinction in the Force between good and evil, between light and dark. It's all subjective, and you have the right to use whatever power that there is. That, by definition, is evil. And Palpatine has that philosophy, and so does Francis Underwood, the character. And I really think, I don't want to go too far on what I'm saying, but studying hermeneutics and doing exegesis on his words, his responses to the interviewer's questions, sounds like to me, in a lot of ways, that Beau Willimon, he himself has that nihilistic sort of postmodern nihilistic worldview. Unfortunately, that's what I read, and when I was bothered. Back up a little bit. I was bothered by the House of Cards, especially after season 3. Season 1, 2, I was bothered, but especially season 3. After season 3, that's when I gave up. I was doing research, and I found those statements, and it helped me understand where the thinking of this show was, just because of the thinking of its creator. Drama is the product of its creator and will present the worldview of its creator. And so Beau Willimon, who I think has that postmodern nihilistic worldview, basically embodies his protagonist character, Francis Underwood, and it as one who is postmodern, who is the Machiavellian postmodern nihilist, and who's willing to do anything, no matter how atrocious it is, no matter how evil it is, and how brutal and horrible it is. He's willing to do without a conscience to obtain the power that he seeks. So in essence, he's the bad guy. It's like, don't get me wrong, I like there's TV shows that are very, very good which have cast of main characters who have protagonists who are shady, you know, sort of like, you know, the outlaws, the bad guys, or whatever. And you still root for them. You still want to root for them. Two examples. One example is from back in the 80s of Blake 7. It was a science fiction show in England, and that was airing England same time that the classic Doctor Who series was airing too. And I would say that its American counterpart, more recent years, is Joss Whedon's Firefly. And basically, they had the basic concept is a group of people in a spaceship that's evading the government of the civilized galaxy, which is corrupt in itself, evil in itself. And they're kind of shady. They're like cowboys, you know, almost like a Western. And they're kind of shady themselves, narcissistic. But you see at times the main characters show altruism. They get close to one another, and they form bonds with one another, and you see them in certain episodes doing things outside the character of being a narcissist and sacrificing for their fellow man. So you see them at times being narcissistic and shady, but you see some of that goodness come out, and you end up rooting for them. So you can have a very gritty show with some shady characters, but still root for the main characters. And in House of Cards, I can't do that. Because there is nothing good. There is no redemptive quality for Francis Underwood. He is the bad guy, like the embodiment, like Hitler, or the embodiment of Satan as the President of the United States. And the bad guy, this evil character, is actually the hero. He's the antagonist, not the antagonist, the protagonist. He's actually the hero of House of Cards. You know why? Because, you know, and the thing is, this is the reason why I wanted to do this blog, is because in House of Cards, you know, in a drama, you have to relate to the characters in order to enjoy it, in order to get involved. Just like in a horror movie, or like Hitchcock. Let's talk about Hitchcock. Just like in a Hitchcock thriller. Hitchcock used it, and I remember seeing some interviews by Alfred Hitchcock where he talks about, he gives you a little bit of information, like there's a bomb in an office underneath a desk nobody knows about, and the people in the room, they're around talking about baseball scores, and you at the same time that none of the characters don't see this, but you see the thing ticking down to the time of the bomb's detonation. And you're yelling at the characters, don't talk about baseball, there's a bomb in the desk, get out of the room, leave. Well, why would you say that? Why would Alfred Hitchcock say that? Because he wants you to identify with the characters. You're concerned about the characters, you don't want them to die, you want them to survive. So you're rooting for them to survive. You're relating to the characters. Well, Bill Willimon wants you to relate to Francis Underwood. And so all the problems and all the obstacles, the good people, quote unquote, what he would call, who have ideals, live by ideals and live by morals, who try to oppose him from his conquest and try to expose his crimes. He either frames them for a crime to put them in prison, eliminates them one way, or worse comes to worse, he kills them. So, so actually the bad guy, the villain, the evil one, is the hero because, and this is what I see is, instead of people being appalled I get appalled at seeing this kind of stuff, but then I see the American public, and they're rooting for him. They're like cheering him on, yay! It's like, something's wrong. I mean, he's doing his job. He's getting people to vote, to really enthusiastically vote for Francis Underwood. So he's the protagonist that you vote for, the hero that you vote for. But he's evil. I mean, Francis Underwood, I would describe him as an amoral sociopath and a homicidal psychopath. Now, Palpatine obviously has the same, what I would consider him a sociopath and a psychopath despot. He has that same nihilistic worldview that Francis Underwood has. But see, that's where Star Wars and where the worldview of Star Wars and the worldview of House of Cards differ. Let me explain how the House of Cards and Star Wars differ. Let me talk about Star Wars, because like I said, we know the comparison that the rise of that Palpatine's rise to power as the supreme despot, the emperor of the galaxy, the Galactic Empire, his rise to power to that was almost identical to Francis Underwood's rise to power. His from the House Majority Whip to all the way to the president. That same rise to power that Palpatine had was pretty much identical to Francis Underwood. But that doesn't mean that Star Wars and House of Cards are exactly the same. Now, I talked about the worldview of Boo Willimon, who is the creator of House of Cards, and also the worldview of Francis Underwood, and of the overarching theme, worldview theme of the House of Cards. Let's talk about the overarching theme of the worldview of Star Wars. Okay? In the Star Wars universe, the worldview of Star Wars, the Force governs the universe. So there's, I'm going to get more into it. I'm not going to go into much detail about talking about the concept of the impersonal, the Force is an impersonal energy field, or it's a personal divinity in some way. I think both aspects are true to the Force, but I don't want to get into that because that'll take me off on a rabbit trail. I'll save that for another blog. But you remember what Obi-Wan said to Luke in Episode 4, New Hope? He says, the Force is an energy field that guides all living beings, binds the universe together. So we know that in the worldview of Star Wars, the Force is the governing power of the universe, and it orders all living beings, both within the light and the dark, and the good and the evil. Now, in the early days of the Jedi Order, which took place 25,000 years prior to the events of the 6 Star Wars movies, episodes 1 through 6, the early Jedi Order, at that time, were given a prophecy by the Force. The Force gave them a prophecy, almost very much like Almighty God in the Bible gives prophecy to His chosen prophets. The Force gave these Jedi a prophecy that sometime in the future there would be a time when the dark side would become so powerful and so dominant that it would threaten to extinguish the light side. This is the imbalance in the Force. Remember, we're talking about the balance of the Force? The imbalance. The imbalance is when one side becomes so dominant that the other side's ready to be threatened to be extinguished, and that's what the prophecy that these ancient Jedi received. That there would be a time when the dark side would become so powerful that it looks like it will extinguish the light side and dominate, to the detriment of anything of the light side. So, in this prophecy, it gave that the Force gave the prophecy of the chosen one to bring balance to the Force. This is where we get the concept of the chosen one. And later when I talk about the chosen one, I'm going to be doing one on the good one to see, to get some illustration, is the Mortis trilogy from Season 3 of the Clone Wars, where we see these 3 ascended beings in the Force. The Father, the Son, and the Daughter. I'll go into that later. That's another thing. I don't want to get too much. I don't want to really talk about now because that'll take me off in a rabbit trail. But that's a good illustration of understanding the role Anakin was to play in bringing balance to the Force. Okay, so now we jump 25,000 years later to the present era of the 6 Star Wars movies. And even though that Palpatine was able to use the dark side and attain absolute power in the galaxy, and he even destroyed the Jedi through Order 66, the Great Jedi Purge, which that in itself, Order 66 and the carrying out of Order 66 was basically the prophecy coming to fruition that the threat of extinguishing the light side, when the Jedi Order was destroyed, extinguishing the light side was threatened. When the Jedi Order, all the Jedi were almost able to be all extinguished except for Yoda and Obi-Wan and a few others that managed to survive. Even in spite of that, ultimately Palpatine is not the supreme master of the universe. For the midichlorians, you remember the midichlorians are the microscopic life forms that live in the cells of all living beings. They're the ones who, or shall we say the middleman, if I want to use that illustration, they're the middleman between the Force and living beings. It's how the Force flows through living beings and communicates through living beings. These are the midichlorians. So the midichlorians the Force prophesied that the midichlorians would create a being, which we now know from the movies, Star Wars movies, as Anakin. It was Anakin Skywalker. They would create a being so powerful in the Force that the Force predestined from conception. Keep in mind that Anakin from conception, he just like the biblical story of Jesus, he was born through a virgin. Well, Shmi Skywalker, his mother, was a virgin. She never had sexual relations with a man. And so Anakin was born through the virgin birth. And by the midichlorians, because the midichlorians conceived him, and he was predestined by the Force from his conception that he would be the one to bring balance to the Force, in essence like a Jedi Messiah, if you want to use that illustration. His destiny was to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. The Force also too, in addition to that, now keep in mind, get through the controversy, because I know a lot of people comment to me, and I've talked to a lot of people confused about this. You know, when Anakin fell to the dark side of the Force, did that mean he forfeited his right as a chosen one? No. It's just that the Force works in mysterious ways, for lack of a better term. In essence, the Jedi, yes, Obi-Wan and Yoda thought he failed. They thought that perhaps, I think that's why they put so much emphasis on Luke, because they thought that Luke would take up that role. But it wasn't Luke's job to be the chosen one. Luke's job was to be the redemptive role. It was Anakin's offspring, his children, which brought redemption back to Anakin. And when Anakin was redeemed and was brought back to the light, that's when when at the end of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, when he turned back to the light in order to save his son, Darth Vader picked up the Emperor, threw him over, and destroyed him. That's when Anakin fulfilled. Luke was the redemptive role. He brought his father back to the light. Then Anakin, aka Darth Vader, destroyed Emperor Palpatine. So Anakin was no longer Darth Vader, so his part in the Sith was over. He was dead as a Sith Lord. And then when he killed Palpatine, he destroyed the Sith. So he destroyed the Sith. Essentially, Anakin destroyed the Sith, and he fulfilled his role as the chosen one to bring balance to the Force. But that's not the only way I would emphasize that the Force is working through a predestination in the galaxy to bring balance when evil is taken over. The Force also is working through the flow of history. Remember, the Obi-Wan didn't say just the Jedi alone, but he said the Force governs all living beings. It binds the galaxy together. And it does it through the free will, or the will of living beings throughout the galaxy. So many of these, sort of like the Force governs the nature and the reality of the universe, and the Force was working in a way, not just through the Jedi, not just through the chosen one of Anakin, but also through the citizens of the galaxy, because the citizens, when they were persecuted, what did they do? They banded together in resistance cells and formed a rebellion. And they formed the organization that we know of as the Alliance to Restore the Republic. A more popular term, the Rebel Alliance, as we know it from episodes 4, 5, and 6. And they opposed it. They opposed Emperor Palpatine. And they went to war, known as the Galactic Civil War. Became the Galactic Civil War in episodes 4, 5, and 6. They went to war against the Empire. And their job was to dethrone Palpatine, defeat the Galactic Empire, and restore the Republic. That's why they call it the Alliance to Restore the Republic. And which they eventually did, through both the working together, both the Force working through the Jedi, Luke and his redemptive role, Anakin and his role as the chosen one, and also the Rebel Alliance in their war against the Galactic Empire, overcame overwhelming odds and defeated the Empire. And they were able to restore the Republic, and they restored democracy, freedom, and justice at a great cost. But they did. So that was basically the worldview, is the dark side, there is free will. There is a distinction, a real distinction, objective distinction between good and evil. There's people who can choose free will to choose whether the good or the evil. And there's some who choose evil. They can wield their power, the Force even, for conquest and evil. But the Force is also working its will through the Jedi and even through people to overcome evil and to restore good. That is the theme of Star Wars, the worldview of Star Wars. Now, returning to the worldview of the House of Cards, let's talk a little bit more about its worldview. Okay? It's now what we got done saying is going back to the comparison between Palpatine and Francis Underwood. They both had that very parallel climb to power, to the ultimate power. But whereas in Star Wars, the Force is governing, there's a clear distinction between good and evil, and objective morality, and the Force is working through the Jedi and other citizens, other living beings, to fight against the evil and to overcome the evil. The House of Cards doesn't have that. That's where the worldview of Star Wars distinguishes from the worldview of the House of Cards. Because in the worldview in the House of Cards, the world is essentially what Beau Willimon is saying, and the world according to Francis Underwood is the world is devoid of God. There's no force that governs the nature of good and evil. There's no objective morality, no objective good or evil. Essentially, it's the nihilistic atheist view. We're just matter and energy, no good, no evil, nothing objective, and there's no force guiding its citizens, the living beings, to destiny and a fight between good and evil. Because there is no good and evil, and there is no destiny, and there is no force of good guiding humanity. It's just all random. And there's just you, essentially, as a struggle, just like Friedrich Nietzsche's worldview of the Superman, the strong man, is that if you have power, then you can, might makes right. You can enforce your worldview and your power onto others. It's the belief that the world is ultimately nihilistic, and where it's amoral, no morals, right? Like I said, no objective morality, no objective distinction between good and evil, and therefore that leaves pragmatism. Pragmatism is whatever works. Doesn't matter whether it hurts others. It doesn't matter whether it's seemed atrocious or not. If it works, use it. And that's the principle, the sole principle by which the world works in the House of Cards. And that's how the world is governed by. Just by naturalism, pragmatism, nihilism, and basically your will to do it. Because keep in mind, this is the thing I find so atrocious with Beau Willimon talking about his worldview with House of Cards and Francis Underwood, is he's sitting there saying that morality, compassion. You know, in the first scene, you know, we see that where he kills a dog rather than having compassion and trying to save it. That gives you the flow of where the series was going. And it's the idea that compassion, morality, having convictions, having having altruism, wanting to sacrifice yourself for others, holding back, so, you know, being willing to do without or being willing to hold back because you don't want to harm others. To do no harm, you know, the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, physicians take, to do no harm, to have compassion, to be willing to sacrifice, to having those ideals, to having an absolute morality, to having a distinction between good and evil, and to have convictions to remain good. Francis Underwood considers that weak. He considers that useless and weak. Whereas I, as a Christian, think that that's strong. That's the heart of God. And that's the essence of the worldview of Star Wars. That's why I love Star Wars so much. And that's why I hate the House of Cards, is because the House of Cards has that worldview, that objective morality, compassion, altruism, all those things are weaknesses. In order to be the supreme human being, the Superman, Nietzsche's Superman, you have to get rid of all morality, all compassion, and be willing to do whatever it takes. Be heartless. It's essentially a sociopath. That's what a sociopath does. A sociopath and a narcissist only does what is beneficial to oneself. They have no compassion, no moral conscience, and essentially, whereas in Star Wars that's seen as bad and evil, where good will overcome, in the House of Cards, that's normative. There is no bad, good, or evil. That's actually good. If there is any good, that is good. To be a sociopath, not care about anyone, to be willing to harm, kill, maim, do whatever evil thing you do, and that's considered good, that in itself is evil. And it's an atrocious worldview, an evil worldview. And that's why I wanted to deal with this, is because I think that's a dangerous message to the American consumer who is eating up this stuff and thinking it's wonderful. And I don't like that. And that's why I've personally chosen not to watch it. But let me go on. We can see where this worldview, which I just described, this worldview of pragmatism and nihilism, the strong man being willing to shed any kind of ideals of absolute morality or absolute distinction between good and evil. We can see this worldview personified in Frank Underwood. And remember, like I said, he talks to his audience, and we can hear his audience, and he expresses his philosophy. And it's a very cruel and brutal philosophy when he's talking, like he does something atrocious. And he jokes about it, almost saying something sarcastic. I mean, it shows you that's like the mentality of a sociopath or a psychopath. That's like Ted Bundy or Adolf Hitler. Look at any kind of despot like Hitler or Stalin. Or look at serial killers like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy. And you will see they do such great harm and such great evil. And they have no conscience. They do it just like you would get up in the morning and eat breakfast and not even think of it. They can go out and commit cold-blooded murder and not even think about it. I mean, for crying out loud, if I do something so much as get a parking ticket, I feel ashamed. I don't want to, talk. It's like, oh my gosh, I did something bad. I got in trouble. They give me a ticket. Oh gosh, it's like I'm breaking myself up. These people, think about it. I get upset over a parking ticket. These people, a sociopath does these evil things. Doesn't even think about it. Doesn't even. They go home. It's like, I can't believe it's just like they have in the house, just like you would see with criminal organizations. They go out and kill and assassinate and do all these horrible things, and they come home and act lovey-dovey with their family. It's like, how can they do that? That's the House of Cards. That's that, and they're not sitting there saying that's the character of Francis Underwood. They're sitting there saying that's the worldview of the House of Cards. That's the all-encompassing. That's the world that we live in, and that's and that because Francis Underwood is the hero of the show. He defines what's right and wrong. Just as the Jedi define what is good and evil in Star Wars universe, he defines what is right and wrong. And so his idea of cruelty and brutality and the shedding of any kind of morals or consciousness, that's what's good for his world. And we can see this as he's expressing his philosophy. And he commits some of the atrocities. Like I mentioned, the crimes and atrocities. I mentioned in the first season, one of the first things he did is he runs over a dog. Dog's still alive. Now, he could have taken that dog to the vet to see if it could be saved. If there was nothing they could do, then they can mercifully, put him down. But that's not what happened. He decided he didn't want to bother. Keep in mind, compassion, altruism, trying to help even an animal, was useless to him. So he viciously kills the dog, has no conscience about it. And I think to myself, what an evil thing to do. His act wasn't an act of mercy to put an animal out of sleep, to put an animal out of its misery. His thing was viciousness because he didn't care to try to help that dog. It's funny. I'm a very compassionate. I love animals, especially dogs. I have a very soft heart for dogs. I love dogs, and I cry. It gets me upset and angry, and I even cry when I see animals being abused. It's horrible. And when place I was working at many years ago, my partner who I was working with had a famous saying, and I love it. And I still use this statement even to today. She says, "The more you see people, the better you like dogs." And how true that is. You don't see dogs screwing you over for percentage so they can just gain selfishly and narcissistically. This is the essence of Frank Underwood, especially that's like sets the mood for the whole series. And I almost forgot about that until I did research after seeing season 3. But let's move on. Okay, as the series moves on, Frank Underwood commits more atrocities, commits more crimes, we can see this. There's a character, a representative, a congressman, a congressman representative known as Peter Russo, and he's basically a good guy. He from Philadelphia. He was from the Philadelphia area, and I'm trying to remember what his friends were because they were in blue collar workers in a trade where they supported Peter to go into politics because he was going to support maintaining their industry away from the greed and corruption in Congress. So that's why they supported him and got him elected as a representative in Congress. But he had weaknesses to alcohol. He was an alcoholic, and also to prostitutes. And one night he was pulled over by a cop and arrested for having a prostitute in his car and driving one under the influence. Well, Francis Underwood, Frank, used that to his own advantage. He bailed him out, sort of illegally, or manipulated the police into bailing him out, and said, "Because I bailed you out, I own you. Because if you do something against me, then your career as a congressman is over." And so, but he says, "I'll help you I'll help you win the election in Pennsylvania as governor." So he does all that stuff, but it was only not to help him. It was only to manipulate him so he can rise in power. When he was done with them, you throw him away. And as a matter of fact, one of the things he did that caused the crisis of conscience is that he forced him. He didn't want to do it because the whole point for Peter Russo going into politics was to help his friends, his family, his friends, all the people he knew back home. But he was forced. He was blackmailed and arm twisted by Frank to flip flop, and he betrayed his friends and caused a lot of his people at home to be out of work, caused him to be unemployed, which was the total opposite of why they got him into politics, so they can help him. And that destroyed him. It destroyed his conscience. And he went back to drinking alcohol and stuff like that. And then they really derailed him because while he was under the influence, they exposed him with a prostitute, and it was just a total mess. And then he destroyed his career. And the prostitute, which I will bring up in a second, Rachel Posner. She's an interesting character, but I'll bring up in a second. But Russo has a crisis of conscience, and when he tries to go confess what he's done, because he felt he has nothing more to lose, his family and his friends hate him at home, he's destroyed his career, so the only thing to do is to come clean and try to make things right. So he tries to confess the corrupt, illegal things that Frank has been doing to the law enforcement. But Frank, of course, he's supposed to be the protagonist of the show. He's not going to go down. He finds out about Russo's plans, so Frank has him murdered. Actually, he murders him himself, and never has to. But this is part of the worldview of the show. Never has to account for it. through law enforcement and count for his murders. And also, too, it started in season 1. Frank starts having an affair with reporter Zoe Barnes. She has very ambitious goals, very selfish, ambitious goals, to become a high-profile reporter in Washington, to be able to get into the White House and get details. So she starts having an affair, and she gets all the inside scoop from him. But he expects total loyalty, that, he has her on a leash. But then when she finds out, starts connecting the dots and finding out about the murder of Russo and his corruption schemes, she's trying to investigate further. So, Frank, again, finds out that thinks that she's off his leash. He has her murdered. He murders her person. He pushes, tries to meet her, secretly meet her, call her to meet him. And I don't know why. It's like one of those things you could see just like in a Hitchcockian thriller. It's like, why are you going? You think somebody is crooked and they're a murderer and they're dangerous. You don't meet them in some private place. You meet them in a public place. So they don't dare to do anything against you or try to harm you. But she does. She goes down to the subway in D.C. And so she meets him behind a corner where it's private, nobody sees him, and he pushes her in front of an oncoming train and murders her. And again, going just like the worldview of that show, he gets away with it unscathed. Doesn't have to answer for it. And I'm watching this, and I'm just getting appalled that this is going on, that he's committing these crimes and going unscathed. And then he spends part of the rest of the season, too, and this is in season 2 this is happening, then all the colleagues that were with her trying to follow up on her death and uncovering Frank Underwood's illegal corrupt schemes, he has them, frames them for federal crimes and has them put in prison. So he's doing all this evil, corrupt stuff unscathed. But that's Beau Willimon's worldview. He's the hero of the show, and he defines, the theme or the overarching force of that world, which I think is evil in itself. It's an evil theme in of itself. Then finally, this is really, because keep in mind, season 3, some people were disappointed in season 3 for the very reasons I found part of it to be, the first half to be tolerable, because it had a lot of, I get a little kick out of, seeing the political conflict, because Frank Underwood, for the most part, he wasn't scheming and framing people and murdering people. He was the president, so he had to deal with presidential issues, leading. And so his scheme, his ideas, his policies, and how he was that political power between Congress and senators and him, and how you get frustrated with them, and some of this, you get funny, even though it's politics or dirty, you can get a humorous out of it. But at the end, when it started to get back to some of the dirty stuff, like at the season finale, what happened was at the season finale of season 2, remember I talked about Rachel Posner, who was the prostitute who was used by Frank to out Russo, to destroy his career. Well, she was afraid that she was going to be silenced, so she hit Doug Stamper. Now, Doug Stamper is Frank's chief of staff. He's the right-hand man of Frank Underwood. So Doug Stamper gets knocked on the head, and he's left for dead at the end of season 2. But in season 3, he survives, and he's recovering, going through therapy and recovering. Well, in the final season finale of season 3, he's fully recovered. And Frank, making him his chief of staff again, he uses his arm to force the FBI, which is able to track down people, to give him information. So he's able to track down, because Rachel Posner changed her identity, and she didn't want to get involved and start exposing people in politics. She just wanted to live a quiet life. And he stalked her, and viciously murdered her, even when she tried to plead for her life. And I thought that the way it was done, I guess other people, when I read online, I was appalled to see how people thought that that was so great. That was awesome. He's back on his game now. I was appalled. I was so angry. It's so angry I wanted to throw, rock at my TV. That's how angry I was, and appalled at that. Because again, doing something atrocious, evil, going unscathed. And according to Beau Willimon and the reaction that people, a lot of the fans of the show have. I feel like, I mean, so far I'm the only one that I've read so far. I'm sure there's others out there, but I'm the only one. That's why I'm doing this blog. Is that was actually appalled at that scene. And when I saw that scene, when he murdered her in cold blood and just got away with it, unscathed, not have to answer him for it, and the stuff he did was super, super stupid. Buying an unmarked pickup truck, going in, giving a list to a store clerk to get rope, chloroform and bleach and shovel. I mean, those are all +1 ingredients for murder. I mean, my gosh, anybody in reality who did that actually did that. There'd be some investigations going, especially in this day and age. But yeah, he gets away unscathed. But again, that's the worldview theme of that show. And bringing this to its conclusion, the reason why I did this blog, even like I said, going back to my beginning topic, that this was that I did this on the House of Cards, which is not a science fiction show, because I was so appalled. I mean, I thought that the season 3 was going to get a little better. I don't know where my mind was, but at the end, just like I shared with you what happened in the season finale of season 3, I was just as appalled as I saw in the earlier 2 seasons. And because I don't see anybody else, at least from my research, from the reviews I'm reading online and stuff like that, I don't see anybody outcrying. Now maybe this is something with me, a personal quirk of mine. But I wanted to do this is because worldviews are important. Watching movies and TV shows, it's more than just entertainment. They teach us things. They teach us values. I mean, think about it. Think about in the 80s, Star Wars, Indiana Jones. I mean, like with Indiana Jones, do you realize that after the movie came out, tons of people wanted to go into archaeology, study archaeology? There are tons of people who grew up watching Star Trek, the classic series, in syndication, that wanted to study astronomy, go and become an astronaut. There are, remember with Jaws, after Jaws came out, people were afraid to go into the world. Movies affect people. It's not just entertainment. They do affect the worldview that's positive. They teach things to people. And it bothers me because always, whether it be Star Trek, or whether it be Marvel superheroes I grew up with, or Star Trek, or Star Wars, especially Star Wars and Doctor Who, I always wanted to be a Jedi, or a Time Lord. I wanted to be the good guy. I wanted to be, the hero that saves people, and puts the bad guy away, puts the bad guy in jail, and saves the day. I wanted to be the person that preserves democracy and freedom, and saves people's lives. That's what the things that I was into, whether it be Star Wars, or Doctor Who, or Star Trek, or Marvel superheroes, or whatever. Those are the things I aspired to be as a kid. And now I see a younger generation aspiring to be gangsters, and drug dealers, and stuff like that, because their heroes on TV are that. So movies and TV shows affect people. The worldview does teach things. And House of Cards, Star Wars teaches something, and that's why I love it, and I encourage others to be involved in it. But House of Cards also has a worldview that it teaches. And it's teaching an entire generation that there is no morals, there is no absolute distinction between good and evil. You can be powerful, and if you use it, no consequences. You can get away unscathed, and you can achieve ultimate success. Not realizing that people who do achieve ultimate power and ultimate success, especially in corrupt and evil ways, are very unhappy people. The world, this is God's world. God's not going to bless his lie. He's only going to bless his truth. So you are not going to do evil. You might thrive, for a day, and feel like you're happy, but ultimately you're going to be a miserable person, because that's where evil, sin, and corruption lead. And I'm not saying they're saying this. Keep in mind, I want to emphasize too, I'm not saying, please don't think that I'm not trying to be like your typical strident fundamentalists saying, don't drink, don't smoke, don't go to movies, don't don't watch TV, and don't date girls who do. I'm not trying to. If you want to watch the House of Cards, I respect that. That's perfectly fine. That's what you like. I personally will not watch it anymore. When they come out with season 4, boycotting it on Netflix. Totally boycotting it. I do not want, like I said, just like I want to talk about things that I enjoy rather than things I don't like, I want to engage in things that I enjoy and I love. And I don't want to spend my time, time is precious, and I don't want to spend my time on things that are going to bring me down emotionally and harm my spirit. I want to do things that are going to lift my spirit, like watch Star Wars. So House of Cards is not for me. But if it's for you, I respect that. If you want to watch it, that's fully fine. I'm not sitting there saying I'm not going to put you down. If you want to comment to me in my video and say I love the House of Cards, I'll watch it, I'm going to fully respect that. I'm not going to argue with you. I understand and I respect that. Just as long as you respect my point of view, then we can agree to disagree. So this is not one of those things where I'm telling you what to do, because I would never presume to tell you what to do. I'm just telling you that if you watch House of Cards, that's your freedom to do it, and I respect that. But watch it with discernment, because these are the things I have against it. Hopefully I've done a thorough job explaining the worldview of the House of Cards and comparing it to Star Wars, because I think there is a linkage, a parallel, but a very different worldview, of a very different outcome of the way that the worldviews are presented. I hope I did a good job. I hope I did a sufficient job, shall I say, of presenting those worldviews and presenting what I have against, my angst of what I have against the House of Cards. So hopefully, I would enjoy your comments and discuss this further with you. I think it's time for me to end this blog, because I know it's been long, a lot longer than I wanted to, but it's good because I needed to get these things off my chest. So with that, I wanted to thank you for watching my video. If you enjoy this video, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to my channel to get all the latest updates. Hopefully my next video, knock 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 3 times is a charm, hopefully that my next video blog will be on the Doctor Who mythology, on the theories on time travel. That should be very interesting and exciting. So hopefully you look forward to that. In the meantime, I wanted to bid everyone a good day, and may the Force be with you.